I mentioned at the start of the show we have a guest joining us, and he's written many books. I'm going to show you the one we're going to talk about today. It's called The Devil and Karl Marx by Dr. Paul Kengor. This is the picture of it, and I did get this from Amazon. Okay, don't tell anybody. I still use Amazon, even though I try not to. But anyway, it's a great, great book. And we're going to be talking with Dr. Kengor. And before he joins us, I want to briefly tell you about his background. He is a professor of political science at Grove City College in Pennsylvania. It's a private Christian liberal arts college. But I want to tell you the names of the books he has written before this. And it's funny because what I printed out had the names as well as the pictures of the books. And in our home, we have many conservative books lining our bookshelves. And I was noticing, hey, we have that. But this one, Devil and Karl Marx, his current one, the subtitle, Communist Long March of Death, Deception, and Infiltration. And this was actually published in August of 2020. He also has The Crusader, Ronald Reagan and the Fall of Communism. We have that one in our house. A Pope and a President, John Paul II, Ronald Reagan. He has Dupes, How America's Adversaries Have Manipulated Progressives for a Century. Principles of a Reagan Conservative. I mean, he's just a prolific writer and a very, just a great guest to have. I'm very honored he could join us today. So without further ado, let's say hello to Dr. Paul Kengor.
Hi, Debbie. Good to meet you. You caught me on my way to Cuba. I was planning to go down there and live and get all that great free health care and free education for my kids.
I've been thinking about that too. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You know, if I could, here's a stat for you. And this was published in the Black Book of Communism, which was the Harvard University Press book, came out at the end of the 20th century, so 1999. And at that point, we were aware of about 100,000 people who had attempted to make the swim from swim or float from Cuba to Florida between 1959 and 1999. And the estimates are that possibly as high as upwards of 40,000 people drowned, died, trying to make that swim. And the Castro government would fly overhead with helicopters and drop sandbags on them while they were in the water. Now, they didn't shoot at them with guns because that would have caused an international incident. Dropping sandbags on them almost seems comical, right? But you know, you get hit with a sandbag dropped from 5,000 feet after you've been swimming for 30 miles. See how that works, right? But that's, and how many people swam from Florida to Cuba during that time? Zero.
Nada.
Zero.
Yes.
Michael Moore, all the rest of them, all that wonderful health care, Bernie Sanders, nada, right? Nada.
Right.
Anyway,
I love
I
that
digress.
I'm so glad you did. Actually, I love that you jumped in, and it's such a great point. We've been talking about that in the show a lot in the last few weeks, and actually for years, the idea that the people do not want to live under communism. I'll tell you a funny story too. We're getting sidetracked, but in college, I remember having a professor who was a pretty far leftist and talking about the beauties of communism. And I asked the question, well, you know, if communism is so great, like at the time, you know, you have communist Russia, if it's so great, why do they have to wall them in? Why do they have to make it that you get shot if you try to leave? What is the reason that you would have to do that? And he had this really intellectual, I still remember the language. Yes, the territorial imperative is perplexing. I'm like, that's your answer?
Yeah,
I mean,
nice.
There's no answer to it. Nobody wants that.
If I could respond to that. So I interviewed Cap Weinberger, Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Defense, and it was shortly before he died. And he said, look, I'm an old man. You're a young man. At that point, I was probably in my late 30s. And he said, you're going to be around longer than me. He said, I want you, anytime anybody ever brings up the Berlin Wall, I want you to ask this question. In which direction did the East German guards patrolling the Berlin Wall, which direction did they face their guns? And the answer was east, on their own people. They never even had to look west, right? Because no one's going to come from the west. Nobody, right? So they faced their guns on their own people. Usually, and Weinberger said, you're talking to a Secretary of Defense, former Secretary of Defense. You know, typically you build fortifications and walls to keep people from invading, to keep the enemy out, right? In this case, they built walls to keep their own people from fleeing. And that right there is a statement of communism. And that professor of yours, you know, they hate it, leftists hate it when we say this, but if he likes it so much there, he ought to go live there, right? And he won't. And that's all you need to know.
all you need to know. This is already a great interview. We're not even talking about your book yet. Thank you so much. I want to tell you, I heard you were interviewed by someone and you made a comment. I was laughing out loud at my desk at home. You made a comment about a book you tried to write that related to Hillary, because you had Ronald Reagan, and the name of the book was Ronald Reagan, something about Ronald Reagan.
God and Ronald Reagan?
Yeah. And you talked about
God and Ronald Reagan.
Okay, but the God and Hillary Clinton, and
right.
the line somebody had about, was it like the liberals don't care if she believes in God, and the conservatives don't believe she does, or something like that.
Yeah, it was, and the publicist and I joked it did terribly. And by the way, the book was translated into Vietnamese, of all things. Right?
Okay.
The only book I've had. It's got a little Vietnamese red flag on the binding, on the spine. And yeah, we said the book tanked because it was rejected by liberals who didn't care that she believed in God, and conservatives who didn't believe that she believed in God. That's exactly right.
It was just a great line. Okay, so I do want to talk briefly the purpose of this book, The Devil and Karl Marx. I must tell you, I did not know until this book that Karl Marx had such a bizarre fascination with the devil and just evil. And it's funny because I mentioned to one of our adult kids who said, "Oh yeah, I knew about that. I never knew that." And so I want to start with just having you give our listeners a description of Karl Marx's fixation on the devil in his poetry he wrote in his life. Just give a summary of that, if you would.
Yeah, it's really chilling. In fact, it's hard to summarize, as you saw, right? I mean, there's so many poems, so many writings. I opened the book with a poem from 1837. If I can remember one stanza, he said, "Thus heaven I've forfeited, I know it full well, my soul once true to God is chosen for hell." And I think the second poem that I quote, 1841, he says, "See this sword, this blood dark sword, which stabs unerringly within thy soul. The hellish vapors rise and fill the brain till I go mad, my heart is utterly changed. See this sword, the prince of darkness sold it to me." He beats the time, he plays the time ever more boldly. I play the dance of death. Really chilling stuff. And in some cases, look, with it, like with any writer, any poet, and Marx fancied himself a poet. Marx wanted to be a poet. You don't know to what extent he's being autobiographical, but I think in some cases it does seem autobiographical, especially that first verse, right, or that first poem. His soul was once true to God. He rejected God. He turned his back on God, and he wanted to write nothing less than the Goethe's Faust of his age. And Faust is the book with the Faustian bargain, with the Mephistopheles character, the demon, the devil character. Yep. And this is chilling, Debbie. People ask Marx, "Do you have a favorite line? Do you have a favorite statement? Do you have a favorite quote?" Now, maybe if somebody asked that question of me, I might cite a Bible verse. I might cite a quote from a saint. I might say something like, "Be not afraid." Ronald Reagan had an Old Testament verse and a New Testament verse. Reagan had a plaque on his desk. It said, "There's no limit to how much a man can achieve if he doesn't mind who gets the credit." Right? Nice statements like that. Karl Marx said, "Oh, yes. Line from Goethe's Faust, the Mephistopheles character. Everything that exists deserves to perish." Right? Everything that exists deserves to perish. And that was Marx. That was Marxism. This idea that Marx and Marxism is this lofty, idealistic vision. Marx was all about burning down the house. I mean, he called for the ruthless criticism of everything that exists. Says communism seeks to, this is one of my favorite quotes, right? Communism seeks to, this is right out of the manifesto, Communist Manifesto, seeks to abolish the present state of things, right? Abolish the present state of things. Calls for the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. The forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Overthrow by force. I did an interview with Dennis Prager, and he said, really, what this is, it's pure nihilism.
Yes.
It is. Marx was not. It wasn't about building up. Karl Marx wanted to burn down the house, which is why He went after the most basic fundamentals: property, God, morality, right?
Church.
The basic the church, religion, abolition of private property. There's even a line in the manifesto: abolition of the family! Exclamation mark. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. Exact words. So Marx really was a revolutionary seeking an absolute, to borrow from the language of Barack Obama, a fundamental transformation of human nature and of all of society, up and down. This wasn't just economic tinkering. This was truly revolutionary.
One of the many things I want to get to talking about today, that was just brilliant. Thank you for everything you just said, was the idea that it's just astonishing when you think of all the philosophers and the great thinkers throughout the millennia who posited ideas about the rights of man and the identity of man, and that this gentleman, I shouldn't even call him gentleman, this man, Karl Marx, managed to have, hatred for God, or became an atheist, but just hatred for religion, destruction of everything, and yet he's held up in so many circles as a laudable, someone to be honored, studied, and it just, I think it's an amazing commentary on American or world intellectualism, on world academia, that he isn't just vilified as a dark and evil, I don't even know what to call him, dark and evil force in history, but he's still read and actually praised in the world today. I find that shocking.
Well,
I'll let you react to it, then I have a question.
Yeah, if Marx was on the right, a conservative, right? And gentleman, he was no gentleman, was he? I mean, the way he treated women, the way he treated himself. If Marx was a conservative, he would have been canceled a long time ago. I mean, the guy was a racist. He was anti-Semitic. He was an ethnic Jew. I mean, he came from a Jewish family, a family of rabbis. He completely turned his back on the Jewish faith, the Jewish people. He said, quote, the Israelite faith is repulsive to me. Some of the statements, I mean, you could take statements from Marx and put them up on a board and say, hey, take a guess at who said this, right? What is the worldly cult of the Jew? Money, right? What does the Jew worship? Money, right? You could be like, who said this? Hitler? Right? No, it was Karl Marx. Marx's evolutionary views, he used the N-word, viewed black people as lower on the evolutionary scale than white people. He and Engels joked about Marx's son-in-law, Paul Lafargue, who was partly Cuban, like 1/8 Cuban, Marx and Engels deduced, which meant to them that he had some Negro blood in his veins, and so Marx referred to him as Negrillo, or the gorilla. And this poor guy had such low self-esteem that he committed suicide in a suicide pact with Marx's daughter. And in fact, Marx is the only historical figure that I know of who had two daughters who committed suicide in suicide pacts with their husbands. So if Karl Marx was a conservative, if anyone from a Ronald Reagan to even Donald Trump had a record of statements like this, the left would be going crazy. They'd be canceling him, and professors with busts of Marx in their offices would be run down by campus feminists and other liberals, but he gets away with it because it's Marx and he's coming from the left, the far left.
Because he's coming from the left. I want to talk about his attitude as well as eventually today in America and around the world, the attitude of the communist, you use the word infiltration, I think, in your subtitle, but the idea of the infiltration of the churches in America and the particular churches they targeted. And what was the reason? Because on one hand, they're trying to say, I mean, for Marx, he's an atheist, and you'd think he would just say, they're silly people. I reject them, but the thinking of Marxism and communism gets you around to wanting to infiltrate it, and again, it's for the purpose of destroying it, destroying its purpose.
Right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Marx said that communism begins where atheism begins. And by the way, listen up, you religious left people who say, "Oh, the communists can really teach us some stuff about the Christian gospel." Yeah, Nikolai Bukharin, one of the founding Bolsheviks, editor of Pravda, said communism and religion are incompatible. We must fight religion at the tip of the spear, at the tip of the bayonet. Lenin said there is nothing more abominable than religion. All worship of a divinity is a necrophilia. They banned religious services. They blew up churches. They threw priests and nuns and bishops in jail. They put them on trial. They were brutal to religion. But then in the United States by the 1930s, and this was launched by really probably the second main head of Communist Party USA, a guy named Earl Browder. The main head of Communist Party USA, the first one, William Z. Foster, who was also one of the founding board members of the ACLU. Okay.
There's no connection there. Go ahead.
No connection there. In fact, the two heads of the ACLU early on, the two founders, Roger Baldwin and Harry Ward. Roger Baldwin wrote a 1929 book called Liberty Under the Soviets. Right? Not liberty under the U.S. Constitution, liberty under the Soviets, right? And he means this in a positive way. He's the founder of the ACLU. Harry Ward, who was known as the Red Dean of American Protestantism, he was a Methodist minister. He was one of the founders of the ACLU too. So by the early 1930s, American communists realized, this stuff about calling religion the opiate of the masses and calling religious people superstitious idiots and so forth, this is getting us in trouble. And there's no way that we're going to be able to pull this off in America. Over in the motherland, right, in the USSR, they could just take the priests out and club them over the head, put a bullet in their head and burn the church down. But we can't do that in America, right? We have something called the Constitution, even though we might prefer liberty under the Soviets. So instead, they did what Browder called the outstretched hand. They started singing, sweet praises about Christianity and talked about, how communism and Christianity are compatible, how the two could work together. And this was part of infiltrating the churches within. And they had their biggest success with the mainline denominations, the Episcopal Church, the United Methodist Church, and they had a lot of success, too, with what became Presbyterian Church USA. But especially with the Methodist Church and the Reverend Harry Ward, who ran a group called the Methodist Federation for Social Action, which was basically a social justice movement in that day.
It's amazing. I was going to mention those three churches because they are today among the most liberal churches. And I think many people who follow those faiths, Episcopal, Methodist, and Presbyterian, they don't know that the theology they're hearing has its roots in communism and the effort of communism to manipulate their faith. They think it's the doctrine or theology according to their faith, not recognizing the roots of, and in fact, the tearing away of the church of the roots of the gospel, where your Christian faith is supposed to be rooted, the actual scriptures. But they think and so they have become convinced that somehow what we're watching in America, the leftism, what I call Marxism. I want to ask you my last question. I know I'm almost out of time, but the Marxism of today, they think they don't hear it as inconsistent with what they learn at church because it's kind of similar. Go ahead.
That's right. And a lot of the Marxism today is being applied not in the economic realm, not on issues of taxes and so forth, but on matters of culture, on matters of race. I mean, this is Patrisse Cullors. She's the founder of Black Lives Matter, and this is her memoirs. And the foreword is written by Angela Davis, the most famous American female communist of all time. And she says in there, she says of herself and Alicia Garza, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, we are trained Marxists. We are trained Marxist organizers. And she goes through here and she talks about we spend a year reading Mao, we spend a year reading Lenin. And it's remarkable. I mean, if this book was just about the racial stuff and the mistreatment of her father and brother, which is all very tragic and I'm very sympathetic to, and you can't argue with any of that. She's got my heart on that. But it gets very political, very ideological, and then after that gets very sexual and very focused on gender. and transgender, transphobia, all these other things. So a lot of the Marxists today, if you go to the website today of People's World, which is the successor publication to the Daily Worker, you can go to the About section, and it says that they're looking for what they call cultural workers. Cultural workers.
Oh.
So not factory workers, right? Not farm workers, not steel workers, cultural workers.
I'm going to check that out. Okay, I know we're almost out of time, and I want to let you go. As promised, I think your book is fabulous. I'll show our listeners right here. Again, The Devil and Karl Marx by Dr. Paul Kengor, right here. A great book. You can get it on Amazon, and I'm sure other places too, in bookstores. And I appreciate your taking the time, Dr. Kengor, to write about this person. It had to be almost troubling to dive into you probably studied it anyway, but troubling to dive into the depth of his thinking. It had to be deeply disconcerting to think this person is swaying so many millions even today.
Yeah, that's the worst thing about it. That's what keeps me up at night, and also to research this stuff and write about it. It's dark, and I teach a course at Grove City College called Marxism. I'm teaching it right now, and one of the exercises that we do, in addition to reading Communist Manifesto and other books line for line, is we go to the websites, Marxist.org, CPUSA.org, that's Communist Party USA, the Socialist Workers Party, the Trotskyist Party. That was the party that Bernie Sanders was a formal presidential elector to in 1980. We look at the website of the Democratic Socialists of America, Revolutionary Communist Party USA. Read the stuff. Actually go and see what they actually say. And to go back and do research on Marx and Lenin and so forth, this is very dark. And it's not easy. It's not fun. I'd rather write about baseball or football.
There you go.
I mean, this is not enjoyable. Right.
Yeah. Dr. Kengor, I can't thank you enough. Great book, really eye-opening, especially in this era in America where there's just such a resurgence of a legitimization of Marxist ideas, socialist, communist ideas as somehow belonging in the American political realm and having a place here. So it's just very enlightening. And thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you, Debbie. Take care.
Great talking to you. Okay, I'll tell you, folks, really, why I think this is so important, why I want to share that with you is there is a lure, a mysticism on the American left about Marx and socialism and communism. These people, these are just better people than we are. They're not these evil, ugly capitalists who care about money. He could not have been a more twisted person, Marx personally, a racist, a sexist, an anti-Semite, grotesque in his thought about life and God and religion, and his intentional, perpetual depravity and willing to have him as well as his followers infiltrate the Christian church, infiltrate society in this world for the purpose, as you heard Dr. Kengor describe, to destroy it. To destroy it. It was not about building up anything, pure destructive motive. Great read, got to do it.